Grief has a strange way of numbing you. The days after my parents passed felt like a blur. Black clothes, quiet tears, the scent of flowers that never seemed to fade. I remember standing at the graveside, clutching the folded program in my hands, staring at the freshly dug earth. My heart felt like it had been hollowed out. But even in the middle of that grief, I found comfort in one thought. At least I still had my family. My siblings and I weren't perfect. We argued. We disagreed, but blood was blood. I thought this tragedy would pull us closer together. I believed that, in our parents' absence, we would lean on one another, sharing memories and protecting each other like they would have wanted. For a while, it seemed that way. We gathered in the old house, sitting at the dining table where we had once laughed over Sunday dinners. We spoke about childhood stories, about Mom's gentle smile and Dad's strict but loving ways. There was warmth in those moments, a fragile reminder of what family was supposed to mean. But shadows were already moving beneath the surface. I should have noticed it then: the sidelong glances between my brothers, the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I should have questioned why certain documents went missing from the stack of papers my father kept in his desk. But I was drowning in loss, blind to betrayal. Weeks later, when the lawyer finally called us in to discuss the inheritance, I walked in with trust. I believed my parents' wishes would be respected. I believed my siblings would honor them. But the look on their faces, smug, triumphant, like predators circling prey, told me otherwise. The will was read. Adjustments were claimed. My name, my share, my place in my parents' legacy, all reduced to almost nothing. According to them, I was taken care of in other ways, and what remained rightfully belonged to them. I sat there in silence, my hands trembling on the polished wood table. My mind screamed that this was wrong, but my voice refused to rise. How could they do this? These were the same people I grew up with, the same people who shared my parents' love. When I asked questions, they dismissed me. When I demanded explanations, they laughed. It was as if I was invisible, an outsider in the family I had given everything to. That was the first time I felt the knife of betrayal press against my heart, and though I didn't know it yet, it was only the beginning of the storm that would change my life forever. Betrayal does not always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it creeps in silently, dressed in smiles and soft words. That's how my siblings came for me, quietly, cleverly, as if they had rehearsed it all their lives. After the lawyer's reading, I tried to reason with them. This isn't what Mom and Dad wanted, I said, my voice shaking. You all know that. But instead of understanding, I was met with smirks. My eldest brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and said, "Maybe you just don't remember things as clearly as the rest of us." His tone was calm, but behind his eyes I saw something cold, something calculating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Every corner of that house held memories. Dad teaching me how to read at the kitchen table, Mom humming as she folded laundry, my siblings and I chasing each other through the hallways. And yet, now, the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by greed. The next morning, I found them whispering in the living room. When I stepped in, they went silent. Papers rustled, and one of them quickly folded a document and shoved it into his pocket. My stomach twisted. Something was being hidden, and I was being shut out. Days turned into weeks, and the lies grew bolder. Bank accounts were closed without my knowledge. Properties were reassigned, and whenever I asked questions, the answers came sharp and cruel. "You're imagining things. Mom and Dad didn't trust you with money. Just accept what you've been given and be grateful." Their words cut deeper than knives. I had been there for my parents when no one else was, through sickness, through long nights in hospitals, through the exhaustion of caretaking. I had given years of my life to them, and now, the very people who had been absent in those hard times were rewriting history, casting me aside as if I were unworthy of my own parents' love. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. My sister's voice, sharp as glass, whispered, "We can't let her get her share. If she does, she'll use it to control everything." My brother replied, "Don't worry, I've already handled it. She doesn't have a chance." Those words sank into me like poison. They had made me the enemy. They had drawn the battle lines without even telling me. For the first time in my life, I realized that blood was not thicker than greed. My family, the ones I trusted most, had chosen betrayal over loyalty. I remember standing in the hallway that night, fists clenched, heart racing. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront them right there. But another part, the quieter, stronger part, told me to wait, to watch, to listen. They thought they had already won, but they didn't know me. They didn't know the fire they had just lit inside my heart. There's a moment, when betrayal finally settles into your bones, that the pain becomes heavier than grief itself. Losing my parents hurt, but being cheated by my own siblings, people I had trusted blindly, felt like a slow suffocation. Everywhere I turned in that house, reminders of my parents whispered to me. My mother's favorite teacup sat untouched in the cupboard. My father's old watch lay on the dresser, its hands frozen, as if even time had stopped. Those things carried love, warmth, and memories. Yet, every glance at them only deepened the ache inside me. Because my siblings had turned that love into a battlefield, I stopped eating with them. Meals at the long wooden table became unbearable. The laughter that once echoed there was replaced with tense silence and sharp words. I withdrew, keeping to myself, replaying every conversation in my head like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my parents hadn't intended for me to have what I thought. Maybe I had misunderstood. My siblings' voices grew louder in my mind. Be grateful for what you got. You're imagining things. Their lies wrapped around me like chains, dragging me into darkness. One night, I sat in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed. The only light came from the lamp by the couch, casting long shadows on the walls. I held one of my mother's letters in my hands, her handwriting delicate but firm. In it, she had written about her dreams for me, her pride in me, her hope that I would be taken care of when she was gone. Tears blurred the words. For the first time, I admitted it aloud to the empty room. They're trying to erase me. That realization broke something in me. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about property. It was about dignity. My family wanted to strip me of the love and recognition my parents had left me. They wanted to rewrite the truth, casting me aside like I never mattered. The betrayal pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I barely slept, haunted by their whispers and their smug smiles. My body felt heavy, my heart exhausted. There were nights I thought about giving up, completely walking away, letting them have everything, just to be free of the poison. But every time I reached that edge, I saw my parents in my mind, my father's stern gaze, reminding me of the strength he always demanded of me. My mother's soft voice, urging me never to let anyone trample over me. It was in those quiet, desperate nights that a new resolve began to take shape. If my siblings thought I was weak, they were wrong. If they thought I would bow to their lies, they had underestimated me. The weight of betrayal hadn't broken me. It was sharpening me, preparing me for the fight that was coming. And I swore to myself I would not lose. There comes a moment when pain turns into fire. For me, that moment arrived quietly, almost unnoticeably. In the middle of another sleepless night, I was sitting at my parents' old desk, the wood worn smooth from decades of use. My father had written checks there, balanced bills, scribbled notes on scraps of paper. I opened the drawer and pulled out one of his old pens. It was heavy in my hand, solid and dependable like he had been. As I held it, I heard his voice in my head. If you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. Those words lit something inside me. I realized that my grief had made me soft, and my siblings were feeding on that weakness. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought my tears meant defeat. But they had forgotten whose child I was. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying, but there was something new in them, resolve. I whispered to my reflection, they think they've won, but this isn't over. From that moment on, my silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. I stopped arguing with them. I stopped defending myself. I let them believe they had broken me. I nodded when they threw their sharp words. I stepped aside when they moved papers behind my back. I let them laugh, let them whisper, let them think they were untouchable. Because while they plotted in the open, I began plotting in the shadows. I went through my parents' belongings piece by piece, searching for anything that could prove their true intentions. Letters, journals, receipts, all of it mattered. I started speaking to neighbors, to family friends, to anyone who had been close to my parents in their final years. Slowly, a mosaic began to form. My siblings had twisted the truth, but the truth was still there, waiting to be uncovered. The turning point wasn't just in what I found, it was in who I became. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to please everyone. I stopped seeking my siblings' approval. I stopped clinging to the idea of family that no longer existed. Instead, I focused on one thing: justice. Every night, I worked in silence, collecting proof, documenting conversations, building a case brick by brick. The betrayal had once weighed me down, but now it was fueling me. Every cruel word they spoke only sharpened my determination. Every smug smile only reminded me why I couldn't quit. They thought I was broken. They thought I was defeated, but I was only getting stronger. And though they didn't know it yet, the storm was about to turn in my favor, because I had found something they never expected, something they didn't even know existed. And when the time was right, I would use it. Revenge wasn't what I wanted, not at first. All I wanted was the truth my parents left behind, the truth my siblings were trying so desperately to bury. So I hunted for it. Day after day, I returned to my parents' house, combing through drawers, boxes, and shelves that hadn't been touched since they were alive. Dust clung to my fingers, the scent of old paper and wood filling my lungs. Every letter, every receipt, every photograph felt like a puzzle piece. I started building a quiet archive, tucking away evidence that painted a different picture from the one my siblings were trying to sell. I found handwritten notes in my mother's Bible, where she had carefully listed what she wanted each of us to have. She had written my name beside the old house, underlined twice. I found receipts for medical expenses I had paid from my own pocket, proof of my sacrifices when my siblings were absent. But the breakthrough came one evening when I discovered a small, dust-covered box tucked at the back of my father's desk. Inside was a stack of cassette tapes, labeled in his handwriting. My heart hammered as I carried them to the old tape player. When I pressed play, the sound of his voice filled the room, firm, steady, and unmistakable. "If anything ever happens to me and your mother," his voice said, "I want this clear. The estate is to be divided fairly. Each child gets their share." And to my youngest, his words faltered, then grew softer. "You stayed with us when others didn't. You took care of us. You sacrificed your life for ours. This house is yours. That is my wish." Tears blurred my vision. I stopped the tape, rewound it, and played it again. Over and over, I listened, my father's voice washing over me like a shield. It wasn't just proof. It was love my siblings had tried to erase. But there was more. At the bottom of the box, buried beneath the tapes, was a flash drive. My father had been meticulous, always cautious. I plugged it into my laptop, and there it was, a video recording. My parents, sitting side by side at the kitchen table, speaking directly to the camera. They talked about their life, their regrets, their gratitude. And then, they talked about us, about me, about what they wanted for each of their children after they were gone. It was undeniable, irrefutable, the truth captured on camera. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew what I held wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. My siblings had built their entire scheme on lies and secrecy. But in my hands was the truth, sharp enough to cut through every deception. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would not rush. I would wait. I would let them dig their own graves with arrogance. And when the time came, I would strike. They thought I was cornered. They thought I was powerless. But I held the one thing they could never fight against: my parents' own voices. And soon, the world would hear them. Patience is a strange kind of power. My siblings didn't realize it, but every day I stayed quiet. Every time I let them sneer at me without reply, I was sharpening my weapon in silence. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought they had broken me down so completely that I no longer had the will to fight. Little did they know, I was simply waiting for the right moment. The weeks leading up to the court hearing were suffocating. My siblings paraded around with smug confidence, whispering about plans, making calls to lawyers, and boasting to friends about how they would finally take everything. They strutted through my parents' house as if it already belonged to them, leaving me to feel like a guest in the home where I was raised. Every time they tossed cruel words at me, I bit my tongue. Every time they dismissed me, I swallowed my pride. Not because I was weak, but because I knew something they didn't. The storm was already brewing, and they were standing directly in its path. At night, I rehearsed. I played my father's tapes over and over, memorizing the sound of his voice. I studied the video recording of my parents, their words burning into my mind. I imagined the moment I would reveal it, the silence that would fall, the way their faces would change. I could almost taste their fear before it even happened. But keeping the secret wasn't easy. There were moments when anger boiled over in me so hot I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in their faces right then and there. But I didn't. I forced myself to smile faintly, to step back, to let them think they had won. And the more arrogant they became, the sweeter the anticipation grew. One evening, my brother cornered me in the hallway. His voice was sharp, his words deliberate. "You should stop embarrassing yourself. You're not getting anything. Accept it." His breath smelled of whiskey, his eyes full of cruelty. I looked at him, calm and quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I only said, "We'll see." He laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh that echoed in the hall. And as he walked away, I felt a chill of satisfaction, because I knew that laugh would die soon, crushed beneath the weight of truth. The night before the hearing, I laid everything out on the table. The letters, the receipts, the tapes, the flash drive. I stared at them for a long time, my parents' voices echoing in my ears. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about justice, about dignity, about love. And I promised them silently, tomorrow, I will let the world hear you. Tomorrow, your voices will silence their lies. I packed everything carefully, my hands steady. My siblings were sleeping soundly that night, dreaming of victory. They had no idea that by tomorrow, their empire of lies would collapse, and I would be the one to bring it down. The morning of the hearing, the world felt unnaturally still. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that comes before a storm breaks. As I dressed, my hands didn't shake. Not anymore. My heart was steady, my mind sharp. I had carried my parents' truth like a torch in the darkness, and now it was time to bring it into the light. When I arrived at the courthouse, my siblings were already there. They stood together, whispering and laughing, their confidence radiating like a shield. My eldest brother caught my eye, smirked, and shook his head slowly, as though I were a child who didn't know when to quit. But I didn't flinch. I let them have their little show, because soon enough, the stage would be mine. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The judge sat sternly at the bench, papers stacked neatly before him. The attorneys shuffled documents, the low hum of voices echoing against the wooden walls. Every sound seemed to amplify the shuffle of shoes, the clearing of throats, the slam of the gavel as the proceedings began. I sat quietly, my folder of evidence resting on my lap. I could feel the weight of my siblings' stares, their eyes sharp with anticipation. To them, this was the final act. They thought they had cornered me, pushed me into silence, and today they would crush whatever was left of me. The lawyer representing my siblings rose first. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with false courtesy. He painted me as irresponsible, untrustworthy, unworthy of my parents' legacy. He spoke as though my siblings were saints, selfless children carrying the burden of responsibility, while I had been nothing more than a shadow. Each word was a dagger, but I didn't bleed. I kept my face calm, unreadable. Let them think their words had power. Let them dig their own grave with their arrogance. When the lawyer finished, my siblings leaned back, smug and certain of victory. I could almost hear their unspoken words. It's over. She's done. Then, the judge turned to me. Do you have anything to present? The room grew still. All eyes shifted to me. For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable, until I could almost feel their confidence waver. Finally, I rose. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp in the silence. I carried my folder to the front, my steps deliberate, my heartbeat steady. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear, unwavering. I have something to present, evidence that will make everything clear. My siblings shifted uncomfortably, confusion flickering across their faces for the first time. They weren't expecting this. I placed the folder on the table, but I didn't open it yet. Instead, I looked directly at them, each of them meeting their eyes one by one, and I smiled, because they had no idea what was coming. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. My siblings shifted in their seats, their smug confidence faltering under the weight of my smile. They still didn't know what I carried. They still thought I had nothing. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, as though each movement were a ritual. The first item I placed on the table was a stack of letters, my mother's handwriting, delicate but unmistakable. These, I said, my voice steady, are notes my mother kept. They detail her wishes for how the inheritance should be divided. As you can see, Your Honor, her words leave no ambiguity. I handed them over. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. My siblings craned their necks, pale faces straining to see. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. My eldest brother cleared his throat, his voice breaking the silence. Those could have been written at any time. Indeed, I interrupted, my tone calm but sharp, which is why I have more. I pulled out a small cassette tape, its label scrawled in my father's familiar handwriting. I nodded to the bailiff, who handed it to the clerk. Within moments, the crackle of the tape filled the courtroom, followed by my father's voice. If anything ever happens to me and your mother, I want this clear. The estate is to be divided fairly. Each child gets their share. And to my youngest, his voice softened, trembling with love. You sacrificed for us. You gave us your time when others didn't. This house is yours. That is my wish. Gasps echoed through the room. My siblings froze. Their eyes widened in horror, their lips trembling as though the ground had just been ripped from beneath them. But I wasn't finished. Your Honor, I said, lifting the final piece of evidence. This is a video recorded by my parents themselves. I handed the flash drive to the clerk. Seconds later, the courtroom screen lit up, and there they were, my parents, sitting at the kitchen table, alive again in moving color. My mother's gentle smile, my father's stern but loving presence. They spoke of each of us, of what they wanted, of what they hoped for when they were gone. And then, as if they had known this day would come, they spoke directly of fairness, of their love for me, and of the house that was meant to be mine. The room fell silent, except for their voices. My siblings stared at the screen, their faces strained of all color, their bodies stiff with shock. The lies they had wrapped themselves in for months unraveled in an instant, shredded by the undeniable truth of our parents' own words. When the video ended, the silence was so heavy it pressed against my chest. Then, slowly, the judge leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. This court has heard enough. I turned my head and looked at my siblings. For the first time, it was they who were silent. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by fear. And for the first time since my parents' death, I felt truly at peace. The judge's words cut through the silence like a blade. This court has heard enough. My siblings sat frozen, their faces pale, their eyes darting from the judge to me, as though waiting for some miracle to undo what they had just witnessed. But there would be no miracle for them. The truth had already been spoken, not by me, but by the voices of the very people they had tried to erase, our parents. The judge shuffled the papers before him, his tone steady, final. based on the evidence presented, both written and recorded, this court finds that the deceased's wishes were clear and deliberate. The estate shall be divided according to their expressed intent. Furthermore, the family home is hereby awarded to the petitioner. The gavel struck once, a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. It was done. For a moment, I didn't move. The words hung in the air, almost unreal. After months of betrayal, months of being silenced and dismissed, I had won. Justice had been served, not through anger, not through deceit, but through truth. I turned my head slowly to look at my siblings. Their faces were twisted with disbelief, anger, and shame. The smug arrogance they had worn like armor was gone, stripped away in front of everyone. My eldest brother's jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. My sister's eyes shimmered with tears not of guilt, but of rage at being caught. For the first time, I saw them as they truly were. Not family, but strangers bound to me by blood and poisoned by greed. I rose from my seat, my hands steady as I gathered my papers. My lawyer whispered congratulations, but I barely heard. My mind was elsewhere on my parents, on their voices that had carried me through the storm. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt lighter, yet heavier all at once. The burden of betrayal had lifted, but in its place was a hollow ache. I had won the inheritance, but I had lost something far greater, the family I once believed in. Outside, the sun was shining, bright and unyielding. Reporters lingered at the courthouse steps, murmuring questions, but I ignored them. My siblings walked out moments later, their eyes avoiding mine. Their faces hardened into masks of silence. There were no words exchanged, no final confrontation, just a wall of distance that could never be crossed again. That night, I returned to the family home, the house my father had promised me, the house my mother had loved. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the quiet wrap around me. The air smelled faintly of old wood and memories. I set my things down and sat in the living room, staring at the empty chairs where my parents once sat. Tears came, not of defeat, but of release. I whispered into the silence, I did it. I kept your wishes. I didn't let them erase me. The victory was mine, but it was bittersweet. The inheritance could rebuild my life, but it could never restore what was lost. My siblings had chosen hatred over love, greed over loyalty, and though I had won the battle, the war had left scars that would never heal. Still, as I sat there, I felt my parents' presence, not in the walls or the furniture, but in the strength they had left in me. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just inherited a house, I had inherited their courage.